Good morning and welcome to episode 2 of our brand new YouTube series. So this week we had the pleasure of heading out to interview Richard Hudson-Evans, one of the most recognised historians, researchers and valuers of the most significant classic sports and race cars around. Now forgive me, I'm going to be reading this because he has had such an illustrious career with a lot of detail and I don't want to miss any of those details. So Richard's expertise is trusted by financial institutions and judiciaries, both public and private organisations. He takes part in panels of international luxury investment reports, such as the respected annual Knight Frank Luxury Investment Index, held annually in London. So a brief overview of Richard's background. Educated at Warwick School, he grew up surrounded by senior figures in the motor industry. Instead of university, he began working at the British automotive sector in 1960, starting at Lucas and later at companies like CAV, Rotax and Girling. His flexibility and skill led him to Ford, where he worked under Stuart Turner, contributing to public relations and even participating in international rallies. Richard collaborated with major media outlets like the BBC, ITV and Central Television on various automotive programmes. His involvement with auctions in the 1970s cemented his reputation as a trusted expert in car valuations. As one of the first to use video productions, Richard's company, Real World, produced promotional videos for top motor companies featuring notable personalities like Jeremy Clarkson and Noel Edmonds. By the mid-1970s, Richard had turned his passion for car valuations into a full-time career, becoming the go-to authority for auction houses, finance and insurance companies and collectors. His extensive network included prominent figures such as Jaguar's Le Mans driver Tony Rolt, whose daughter he employed as his secretary, along with Sally Kemsley, daughter of the RAC rally organiser. Richard's social circle also featured racing legends like Colin Chapman, Bernie Ecclestone, Frank Williams, Lofty England and Duncan Hamilton. From 2003 to 2006, Richard compiled over 1,500 catalogue descriptions, and since 2007 he has conducted over 16,000 car inspections for Bonhams. He provides market commentary for German classic data and UK auction data for Haggerty International. Richard remains a global authority on specialist car values and continues to run his own Formula Ford racing team, WPR Racing. So that's enough from me. Let's meet the man himself. I hope you enjoy the interview. So good morning. You're joining us here from deepest, darkest Warwickshire in the beautiful home of Richard Hudson-Evans. And we've also got Robert Perry, Bob, author of True Spirit of XJ13 with us. So today we're going to be chatting a little bit about car valuation really, and obviously it's an absolute pleasure to meet you, Richard, and tell us a little bit how you've become just so recognised in your field. How have you got to where you are?
Well, I used to attend car auctions as a blessed relief from working in the TV and radio business. It was something to do at the weekends, and I became addicted to that, and ultimately by finding out what things were really like and explaining to myself really why a price was paid for something, that became a bit of an obsession and is now what I do.
Absolutely.
Because the price of everything is dependent on what it is and in what condition it's presented at auction.
Absolutely, and I guess the digging that you have to do to check the authenticity of what has been said about the vehicle, it's in depth. It must take you a long time.
Authenticity is one of the leading factors in valuation. Is the history claimed? Is it authenticated? And is it very rare or is it unique? Or is it very common?
Yeah.
And relatively mass produced? But of course, the more unique or more exclusive something is, there are fewer and fewer people who actually know what it really is.
Absolutely. So how How do you actually then go? It's a unique car. So
A unique car has a unique value.
yeah.
And the value is what somebody's prepared to pay for it. And
Absolutely.
you've got to chart what they paid for it. And that doesn't necessarily mean what you hear when the auctioneer slams the gavel down, the hammer price. The price paid includes buyer's premium. And the price that somebody gets for the car, if they're auctioning it, is obviously the hammer price less the commission charged to a vendor.
Yeah.
So there are always, with any auction car, three figures.
Sure.
What you hear, what you see in the room, what somebody actually pays for it, and what somebody receives back when they have sold it,
Sure.
or it's been sold on their behalf. And then, of course, you get to the valuations of any collector vehicle. The price varies enormously, and of course that's dependent on the number made, how desirable they are, whether it's original, whether it's restored. If it's restored, who did the work? Is the work detailed and therefore authenticated? And the range of, say, a Lotus Cortina could go from £20,000 to £120,000, depending on whether it is a genuine Lotus Cortina or one that just two-door Cortina that looks like one, right up to the real thing as driven by Sir John Whitmore in period or Jim Clark.
Sure. So it is important who's driven it. So the people that have owned the car, who've driven the car, the races it's maybe competed in.
Yes,
success.
The biggest single factor, apart from the model being desirable, the type of car, the biggest single factor is provenance.
Right.
Is its history, and is it fully charted without any gaps? That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And what sort of history? It might be the first production car of a particular model, the last. This needs to be proven, of course. Motor show stand provenance used to be very important in the days when the motor show was the place in every country, every year. So when a car was launched, say at the Paris Salon, and you have that car, it is the one from the stand. That is obviously going to be more desirable for potential buyers than one that's just been sold out of a showroom in Birmingham.
Looking at your career historically, and we've just been talking in the last few minutes about the complexity in many ways of valuing these cars. It appears that your valuations must have been pretty close, because you seem to have done them very accurately. And the proof of this is that people's acceptance of your abilities to value these cars. Somebody's got to.
Yes.
And as you're saying, especially with unique cars, very, very difficult. You've got no direct comparison to build a valuation on. So it seems that your abilities historically in valuing cars is very, very well accepted internationally.
It's been difficult because, of course, you've had the rise, the static prices, and then the fall in values. Not all values, but in quite a lot of values. And of course, everything is valued at some point for probate.
Yeah.
And that is the open market value at the time of death. And of course, if a wealth tax were to be introduced, that would be a tax for the living. But generally, a value has to be determined on the valuation of an estate. But the value of anything, people say, how much is something worth, to me all the time. And I say, well, what do you need the value for? Because you could have the value of something could be the price that somebody might retail it for, an asking price. That could be advertised. It might not be advertised. It might be something you eventually find out what somebody wants for it. So that's at one end of the scale. And then you have at the bottom of the scale a fire sale, something which literally came on the market the day before yesterday. Here it is, a late entry in an auction. What is the net return on that asset? Worst scenario on a rainy day in Scunthorpe. And, or what it's retailed for in Zurich or London at the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
It could be the same asset, but it depends on the circumstances of where it is and in what circumstances it is being sold or being dispersed as to be one end. And then maybe you should insure it for more than people are asking for. So that would be the agreed replacement value with an insurance company. And that's obviously down to them to agree, you to ask, them to agree, and that would be the highest value for anything. To replace it, what it would cost you to go all around the world perhaps looking for one that will replace it.
And what about if you can't replace it? If it is a car that cannot be replaced?
Well, the history
It's a
can't
one-off.
be replaced, of
Yeah,
course.
of course.
But as near to it, history which is comparable with, condition which is comparable with, restoration of similar quality, specification nearly the same. There's very, very few cars that you could never replace in time.
I'm going to ask this question. The original factory XJ13, that's a one-off car. One-off. There's
Correct.
no... Yeah.
So that is unique.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you have a unique asset, you have a unique value. And the value is dependent on what somebody asks for the value, the asking price, and whether that asking price is met. And that determines the proven transacted price and therefore the value.
Does it add any more difficulty attempting to value a vehicle which you can be certain will never commercially go on the market? Does that make valuing that type of car even more difficult?
Yes. You'd have to draw on other exceptional assets to what you know they have transacted for.
Yeah.
And that's why public auction, as opposed to online only auctions, which are not truly transparent because they're not public. They're public in what is published online is a published price if it's published. But in a physical auction where you see and hear assets being dispersed, possibly online, possibly on the telephone, possibly somebody sat in the seats in an auction tent or sale room, those prices, of course, are in public, publicly witnessed, and those are actual prices. And so you have to, if something is truly unique like XJ13, you would have to draw on similar sorts of...
It's the best you can do.
Yes.
It's all you can do.
All you can do, yes.
So the cars at the time, like the Ferrari 250 GTO that we were discussing.
Yeah.
Yes. Now those, of course, are considered the creme de la creme in what they're worth. A lot of people claim huge sums of money, but unless you've actually seen an invoice, a transaction, a bank statement, money leaving, money arriving, how do you know what it's really worth?
Yeah.
Or what somebody has actually paid for?
That's the only time you will know what it's really.
Yeah.
And insurers have got a pretty good idea too.
Yeah.
But generally things are over-insured to get an agreed market price, which allows you to go around the world looking for another one.
Yeah.
And incurring costs doing so. But
because we were looking at the huge, with the Ferrari 250 GTO, we were looking at the huge fluctuations in a relatively short 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, when it's gone from 33 million and then dropped down to 23 million. Then it's gone back up again. It's gone.
yes.
it's such a huge amount of money in such a short amount of time. How is that justifiable?
Well, the market has determined that, and the perception of the market more than the market itself. But you have to follow it closely. It's varying all the time. Every single weekend where there are a number of sales, Monterey Auction Week, 4 major sales within 48 hours or something. Paris, 3 major sales within 3 days. Monaco, more than one normally. There are clusters of sales or beginning of the year sales in different parts of the world, all the auction companies starting the season off. Those prices are very significant, as the ones are at the end of the season. All these prices have to be charted, and you've got to know the condition and the provenance of the car that somebody has achieved a price for.
Yeah.
Because, of course, all the factors, as I've said, provenance, the history of the car, originality is highly valued, but you could have a barn find truly original with flat tires covered with dust, some of the parts missing.
Yeah.
So originality taken to that extreme becomes a depreciating factor.
Yeah.
As opposed to appreciating factor. And then restoration, people say, oh, it's restored. Yes. When? By whom? What did they do? Is the restoration well charted? Is it fully documented? And that's very important. And with the internet, a lot of the things that are claimed for cars are claimed because they're just on Google or somebody says. I do urge all potential buyers and potential sellers and owners to get old-fashioned history together. That means printed off, top copy ideally, headed paper, pretty old-fashioned, charted history file of everything down in paper, in a file, or on a memory stick which is covering everything in a modern form.
But the point being, it's authenticated, you've had it checked, it's been...
Yes.
Yeah.
Number of owners is important, I guess, too. I mean, obviously one owner is the holy grail. Low mileage is holy grail. And obviously the car itself has got to be desirable. But we are still getting world record prices for particular models. Even though people think we're, the economy is, we're doomed, as somebody said on a TV programme, Dad's Army.
Yeah.
Things may not be particularly good that day when you wake up.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to be particularly good perhaps for 5 years, without being political. But world record prices are still being paid.
This is a question I was going to ask. Outside the world that we're talking about, classic cars, what sort of influence does international political situation have on valuation? It must cause a fluctuation, or in times of recession again. But we've seen in previous recessions that one of the things that have held up strongly have been the value of classic cars.
Well, they're real. They're a tangible asset. Kick the tyres and you're kicking something.
Yeah.
Tap it and it's metal.
Yeah.
Or GRP or carbon fibre. But it is real, it exists. It is not a share certificate, which we used to say is just in a desk drawer. These days it's totally electronic and there's nothing to show for your so-called investment. So it's a tangible thing, it exists, it's real, it's transportable too. It can be moved around.
Yeah.
It could be on my driveway this morning, your lock-up tonight.
Can't do that with a house.
You can't do that. You certainly can't. There are no foundations. You see, so it can be moved from economy to economy, country to country, currency to currency.
Yeah.
And it's very much dependent on something we haven't touched on yet, being fashionable.
Yeah.
And that changes all the time. So you get cars which in period when they were manufactured were not fashionable at all. But because of them becoming fashionable,
Yeah.
they're desirable.
Yeah.
And more people
That's-
will think
that's
something's
not-
desirable, the price goes
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, and that's a difficult one to predict.
Yeah.
It is. And of course, it can work the other way. Things become less
Go out of-
fashionable,
go out of fashion.
unfashionable. Nobody knows what they are.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers a lot of the British manufacturers who no longer manufacture cars. So they tend to be very famous, very desirable for people who already own them.
Yeah.
And as long as there are other people who can replace them when it comes for them to leave the field, fine. If the legend is so strong, then the next generation will think they're desirable.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving forward with that theme, desirability of fashioning cars, some of the motor manufacturers have been through a period of creating continuation cars.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to do that unless the car that they're building is they know is going to be fashionable
Correct.
and desirable. How do you see the valuation of those cars into the future?
Well, continuations are a way of extending the visibility, if you like, of a very few originals,
Yeah.
perhaps which are all in storage or in museums. And the continuations mean that they're commercialising the legend, but of course they are, by the very nature of the fact that they're reproducing them, albeit in a controlled and official way, never going to be as valuable as the originals.
No.
But the continuation ones can and very often are used, driven,
Yeah.
enjoyed.
Yeah.
We can see them. Well, the
Yeah.
real ones you don't see
Yeah.
anymore.
No.
Many of the cars in historic racing, GT40s, Cobras and so on, the ones that are raced are recreated, but are obviously compliant to HTP papers and silhouette and specification as being like the real ones.
Yeah.
But they are, in effect, continuations, but not official. Official continuations are officially approved by the manufacturer.
Yeah.
And generally built by.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Or at
if
least
not by
arranged to be
approved
built by.
satellite.
Yeah.
Yes, and they have a value because they are all the same. They're a continuation. They've in fact increased the market for the original, haven't they?
Yeah.
But they're never going to be as valuable as
No.
the originals.
No.
And the trouble is, if they make too many in the continuation, they actually start
Dilute it.
to dilute the
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see them as a reasonable investment? Do you think that their value will increase?
I can't. I don't want to use the word investment because investment proven when sold for more than you paid for it is a happy day. But generally speaking, the reason to acquire, the reason to purchase, the reason to collect should be passion driven, not investment driven.
Yeah.
But fast forwards in particular, certain Japanese GT cars, relatively recent, they are more and more valuable because they're because of being fashionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're fashion driven.
Yeah.
And I mean, who would have thought that quite a lot of people, I'm one of them, drive around in Japanese GT cars? I would never have thought I would have been when I was an apprentice in the motor industry to start with.
So we know that the Knight Frank Luxury Investment Index, as it were, has now added, fairly recently, over recent years, added classic cars to their list of supposedly good investments. Art, fine wines and watches, and now classic cars. But to say, and I mean, no one can say for sure that a classic car is a good investment in monetary terms, but of course, owning a classic car is much more than the money, isn't it? It's about, there's so much more involved, and feelings, passion behind a car, passion, fashion.
Well, you have a situation where what was a poster on a bedroom wall, the poster car, was because they were too young to drive them, and when they were old enough to drive them, they couldn't afford them. and now some of those cars are affordable, or rather the people who find them the poster car today can afford to buy them. So they become fashionable. And of course you get a strange situation. You go back to staple diet of British motoring, the Austin 7, once upon a time. The most popular car made in Britain was the Austin 7 at Longbridge, the largest car factory in Europe at the time. And suddenly the Austin 7 saloon is just a little bit too slow, a little bit too boring. Where the open Austin 7s, the chummy, the sporty, nippy, they become more desirable. They become, an early car. There's a little industry built up around making all the stuff for them. Certainly from the crankshaft upwards, because things break. But a lot of people enjoy them. There's a lot of events for them. They are still cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you go on to cars which, are less cool, Ford Anglias, but more cool, right the way up to Focus RSs, and of course Escort Cosworths. I mean, Escort Cosworths and the prices they're achieving at auction in recent months, even with the political turmoil in the country, not being political, of course, Escort Cosworths are now more desirable and a higher priced, considerably higher priced, as a result of being more desirable than they were when Ford made them in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. And of course this is impossible to predict. You can't predict really which cars in the future are going to become fashionable.
No, because RS Ford generally have led the fast Ford charge in terms of values.
Yeah.
They are responsible for the fast Fords being popular, desirable, and the appreciating prices. Most of the record prices for editions and models have been fast Fords. But then you have a situation with Toyotas, with the GRs. That, if you like, is the RS version of Toyota. So you have GR Yaris, GR Super and so on. They are becoming collectible from just being a desirable new car to becoming collectible. And Nissan Skyline is another one. Subarus, enormous numbers of enthusiasts run Subarus. P1s in particular have appreciated. So, there are things that are going to be desirable, even with electrification. They're going to stand out as being, if you like, worth buying, because they're just not an electrified Chinese box.
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah.
Which none of us want.
No, absolutely not. Listen, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I, for one, have learned so much today. I could talk to you for the next 3 weeks, but I really hope you've enjoyed listening to Richard and Bob. It's been great talking to you, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. It's been really good.
It really has. So we really hope you enjoyed that interview with Richard. I know Bob and I did. We found him fascinating, and to be quite honest, could have sat there for another 2 to 3 hours listening. We really hope you enjoyed it, and of course we welcome your comments, so please do pop them below if you'd like to give us some feedback. We'd also like to mention we are still looking for your cars to feature in future episodes. So if you've got a classic, a sports car, a performance car, or just a car you're absolutely in love with and has some wonderful history, please do get in touch with us. And if you're not too far away from Essex, we can travel to you, have a chat with you, film your car, or of course you're more than welcome to bring your vehicles to us on prior arrangement, and we will of course make a short film on you and your car. We'd also like to invite you to give us any ideas of content that you would like to see. So we're more than happy. These episodes are made for you. They're made to engage you with what we do. So please feel free. Let us know what you'd like to see us cover, and hopefully we'll do our best to cover it for you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in episode 3.